to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to another week of broadcasting here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is a Monday. Today is the 24th day of August in the year 2015. It is a pleasure to be with you today. We're looking at an abbreviated number of changes in schedule here, so I want to take a few minutes at the beginning to talk about changes in scheduling that I know about. First, I'd like to apologize for the late start. We're about 6 or 7 minutes late in getting started today, and it was pure technology. Ain't it wonderful? I love it. We've had issues at both ends, at the studio end and at my end. I've got a fella from the cable company coming tomorrow to look at not only our phone lines, but the internet lines as well. The land phone in my home has been down for several days, and this morning, all of a sudden, I picked it up, mainly because I forgot it didn't work, and lo and behold, it worked. But I'm also getting word that people can't make calls in, so while I can call out, others can't call in. So the fact that the repairman is coming tomorrow is a good thing. And then today we had a few problems at the production end of our program, so it took a few minutes to get going today. But we're rolling now, and it is a pleasure to be with you. I hope that your weekend was a pleasant one. It was here. Those who are consumed, if you will, with checking finances, the financials, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and other things probably have had a pretty dire day today. This morning, I noticed that when I checked the Dow at 9:45 a.m., which is only 15 minutes after the market opened, the Dow was down 641 points, and that's pretty drastic, 6%. However, I checked it about 15 minutes before we went on the air, and it is now down 110 points, which is kind of what we've been going through for the last week or week and a half. So it's still down, but it has recovered from the dire straits that the Dow seemed to be in this morning. I talk about the Dow as if it mattered. I know it matters, but how it affects me, I don't know. Somebody asked me this morning when I made reference to it, if I was invested in the market, and I kind of made the point that we all are, and I'm retired, so by definition, some portion of something is invested in the market, and exactly what and how, I don't know. That's why I have an advisor. But I emailed my advisor about 15 minutes ago and said, fire sale, be aggressive. I don't know what that means, but every time in the past, every time the Dow Jones average has plunged, his very optimistic assessment of that is time to buy. Prices are low, prices are down, so anyway, it is a pleasure to be with you here on this Monday, the 24th day of August. As I mentioned at the outset, we will be having a rather abbreviated week. We're not going to be broadcasting on Wednesday, and the reason is mine. I have an appointment, a doctor's appointment that I have to keep because the only time I can gain access to the doctor is Wednesday afternoon, and that would cut right into the middle of our time together on our regular Wednesday meeting here at the Virtual Center. And since next week I will be on the road, it is very important that I see the doctor before I leave town and for next week. So what that means is tomorrow's abbreviated program of 90 minutes, which will begin 1/2 hour later than today's, will be the final live program here at the Virtual Center for better than a week. It will not be until we are into the month of September. And of course, the very first Monday, the second Monday, or rather, in September, of course, is, I believe, Labor Day. So Labor Day is the 7th of September this year. So it is going to be a little bit rocky for a couple of weeks. So I encourage you to kind of stay tuned and stay tuned to the Head On Radio Network and here at the Virtual Center, we'll do the best we can to keep you abreast of what's going on. Welcome to today's program. It is quite an accomplishment. I felt this all weekend long. We spent a grand total of more than 16 hours of airtime on one document, Madison's Federalist Number 10, over the last 3 weeks. I don't know whether that's a record or not, but I do know that the archives of those 3 programs, of those 3 weeks of programs, probably do as in-depth an assessment and analysis of Madison's Federalist 10 as anyone has ever attempted to do. I hope you will agree, if you've been with us during that period, I hope that you will agree. I hope that it has been informative. It sure has for me. I have learned an awful lot. And I continue to speculate and to think about what we've done in terms of what it might mean in today's political world. I put a short notice on Facebook last evening about our program today. And basically, one of the things I suggested is, now that we've finished Federalist Number 10, it's time to go back to the drawing board, look at what we've got, make sure that we're all on the same page and we're all speaking the same language. In other words, review a little bit of what we know about Madison's Federalist Number 10, what we know about the revisions in the Republic, in republicanism, as Madison explained them and defined them in Federalist Number 10. And then look at the current political situation in order to draw some conclusions, or at least to speculate on some possible conclusions. And specifically, it seems to me, one of the issues that I think we ought to pursue is the extent to which Madison's scheme, Madison's formula, if you will, for republicanism is even working in today's political world. If it is, in what sense is it working? As we look at the numbers of candidates who have announced for the presidency of the United States in the year 2016, and of course the name that has been bandied about all weekend long is Vice President Joe Biden, who seemingly is in the process of making a decision as to whether to run or not. His office has said that he will make that decision by the end of September. And of course, the fact of the matter is much of the political money has already been spoken for, so to speak. So it's going to be a little bit difficult. The longer Joe Biden waits, if he does decide to run, the more difficult it's going to be to gain access to some of the significant funds that seem to be necessary in order to run for national political office today. I mentioned national political office. I would suggest to you local political office has become obscenely expensive as well. But be that as it may, I would like to do a little bit of speculation, a little bit of blue skying. A good friend of mine in the 1980s used to use that term all the time, blue skying. And of course, this is just basically throwing out ideas and seeing which ones fly and how far they fly, how high they go. But I know also that since we finished our treatment of Federalist Number 10, at least for the moment, many of you also have had the opportunity to reflect upon the document, reflect upon Madison's intent, reflect upon some of his assumptions, etc. And you also have had the opportunity to think and to digest some of these things. And I'm sure you too have been thinking about ways that what we've looked at in recent weeks applies to our current political world, or in fact whether it indeed applies at all. If it doesn't apply, then it seems to me that might indicate a real problem. Because Madison genuinely believed that the success of the Republic as he redefined it in the Constitution, and there's absolutely no question, that the transition from Republican government as explained and supported and defined by Montesquieu in the Spirit of the Laws, and the Republic under the Constitution as redefined by James Madison in documents like Federalist Number 10 and Federalist Number 51, which seems to me in the offing in the very, very near future, because I think we really do have to go there as well. Then it seems to me that Madison believed that the formula, if you will, that he used, if that's the appropriate term, that he laid out in Federalist Number 10 was absolutely necessary, the only way to curb what he called the violence of faction. It's very obvious when we look at the activities of interest groups. We look at the population of the infamous K Street in Washington, D.C., and the number of lobbyist offices that run up and down K Street. The number of registered lobbyists in the nation's capital would seem to suggest that interest groups, so much of a concern to Madison, are alive and well. In fact, it appears that we may have found a way, or at least think we may have found a way, to accommodate factions in ways other than Madison's strategy for controlling their effects. These are some of the issues that it seems to me we need to address today on our program. I look forward to hearing from you. I know that many of you have ideas or questions or suggestions or comments or what if ideas and all of these things, and I would love to hear from you. We have a phone line reserved just for that purpose. Our number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. And as we said numerous times, 4676 translates in your keypad, on your keypad, to HORN, H-O-R-N. If you would like to email me directly and share your ideas one-on-one via email, I would be honored if you did that. Because it seems to me that the substance that you would include in such an email is substance that can probably be valuable to share with our listeners and other participants here at the Virtual Center. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's W-A-O'Brien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906, that's all one word, lowercase, at gmail.com. And finally, let me remind you that for the last several weeks, we have had a Facebook page devoted to the Virtual Center. If you go to Facebook and you type Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will gain access to our Facebook page. I invite you to check on that page and feel free to make comments or suggestions on some of the items that I have posted on the Facebook page. As I've mentioned more than once in previous programs, I don't want to get into the habit of putting something on Facebook every day, because that then becomes is an additional stressor, if you will. But I have tried to update the page regularly in order to keep giving people a reason to check it. So over the last couple of weeks, for example, I've taken on the evening before or the morning of one of our broadcasts of posting on the Facebook page what I think we would be covering in that particular day's program here at the Virtual Center. In addition, I have posted some of the ideas I have learned. One of the things I've learned over the many years that I've been on the face of this earth is that I tend to think on paper, or as it were, with word processing, as I look at a blank page on Microsoft Word. I find that writing about this material, about the founders and about the founding itself, gives me the opportunity to effectively what we call think out loud, except I'm not talking, I'm writing. And there's something about putting ideas on a page and then responding to them and allowing what naturally flows from those words to dictate the next sentence or paragraph. And in many situations, I find myself actually composing pretty substantive insights, if you will. And I don't use that word, as any kind of credit on me. What I'm suggesting is that the material tends to write itself. But I find that I think this way, and I ideas come to me when I look at the words. Some people, they need to hear them. For me, when I look at them and I think about them, my mind begins to crank out or generate ideas, and that's the way I function. So I guess at my age, I'm just going to have to live with it, whether in fact it's a good thing or not. But my point is that on occasion, in fact on several occasions, I've taken to Facebook to post some of these, nonverbal opining and thinking and speculating and thinking out loud or whatever you might want to call it. And I put them on Facebook. This morning I put an item on Facebook, which is pretty familiar, I think, here, because I took the liberty when I first submitted this a particular piece a couple of weeks ago of sharing it with you. And in fact, I can remember that I was asking for input before I sent it. I didn't want to send it for publication, have it accepted, and then after it's printed, find out that there's a major omission or a major error in fact or whatever that I might have made and not caught. So, but again, this morning I noticed yesterday that in the Charleston Gazette, Charleston, West Virginia Gazette, which is the state's newspaper, and again our two Charleston newspapers have recently merged within the last month or month and a half. We have the Gazette, which is the morning paper, which has traditionally been on the liberal side of the political spectrum, and the evening paper has been the Gazette Mail, the Mail, Charleston Daily Mail, which has been coming out for years in the evening, and it has leaned a little bit right of center over the years. The two papers, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, merged staffs and merged ideas. So if you go to the Charleston Gazette website, and very quickly, it is wvgazette.com, wvgazette.com, and you look across the border at the top at opinion, and you click opinion, you will get two listings. You will get Gazette opinion, and you will get Mail opinion, Daily Mail opinion. And so depending on which one you click, it's going to take you to either the conservative perspective or the liberal perspective. Well, in yesterday's Sunday paper, the Gazette Mail, these folks were kind enough to publish the piece that I sent them a couple of weeks ago on it included many citations, if you will, from Madison and Hamilton and the rest of them during this period. I thought, and I continue to think, after I reread the piece as it was published in the paper yesterday, that there are some significant conclusions or observations one can make from the material in this article. I don't take, and I'm not looking for any kind of particular kudos here necessarily, because I think these are Madison's and Hamilton's ideas, not mine. All I'm doing is bringing them together and hopefully bringing them to the forefront so that people can look at them and think and consider them. And one of the things that very honestly I have to thank the Charleston Gazette editors for is the title of this piece. Because when I sent it, I tried to come up with a title which would indicate what the entire piece was about. And basically, what I suggested, as a title, was the link between political opinion and the founders. In other words, the extent to which opinion leaders in today's political game, so to speak, seek to appropriate the founders in order to support their own particular agendas. And so the title that I came up with was Political Agendas and the Founders. And the Founders, which, if you think about it, is not really very exciting. It's not the kind of title that's going to grab attention. It's not a grabber by any stretch. The editors, using their editorial license, which obviously they always have when they consider publication of submitted pieces, the editors chose to select another title, which obviously they believed more accurately reflected what the sense of the article was, but more importantly, seemed more to be a grabber than the one that I came up with. The title of the piece, as it appeared in yesterday's Gazette, is, quote, "The more optimistic and less quoted Federalist view of individuals." There's absolutely no question that title does indeed capture what I believe, after having written the piece, really zeroes in on the focus of the piece. And that is that we have been the victims in what we have read over the years about America's founders. More importantly, what we have been taught about America's founders in our classrooms, in our textbooks, as well as in the media, all of it has been tilted in a way which assumes a very precise, clearly defined definition of human nature that is attributed to America's founders. And I believe, as we've mentioned over the last couple of weeks in our treatment of Federalist number 10, there's absolutely no question that Madison's Federalist number 10 has in large part been a major source for that rather negative view of human nature, which has been traditionally accepted and never challenged in our classrooms, in our textbooks, or by our media. Madison's very famous statement in Federalist number 10, that the latent causes of faction are thus sown into the nature of man, has been one of the more frequently cited examples from the writings of the founders to document the assumption that man's nature is innately evil, that man is genetically programmed so that his behavior will be dominated by his self-interest. And the implication to that is that man really cannot overcome his inclination toward self-interest first, always. Whenever the choice comes up, or there is a distinction or a difference between the public interest and one's self-interest, the general conclusion that our society over the years has drawn is that the self-interest will always prevail. And those who buy that have chosen over the years to go back through the same sources that we've looked at, to comb through the sources, and to come up with ways or evidence to reinforce this interpretation of the founder's view of human nature. Basically, what many historians have done is to comb through, sift through the literature, looking for additional examples of evidence that man's nature is evil, and then using that to document and reinforce the basic idea that man's self-interest must always dominate. For those that really know some history, and I mean this, I don't mean this to be disparaging or sarcastic in any way, but we know that a lot of people, especially in the media, are prone to write opinion without much knowledge of the subject at hand. Their goal, obviously, is to shock and inflame, not necessarily to inform or educate. But again, that's another issue. I think all of us know that and accept that as a reality in today's world. But those who really know some early history, early American history, will often go back, and the reason I said that is we've done this more than once here at the Virtual Center in the 30 months that we've been doing these broadcasts. And that is to go back to John Winthrop's view in colonial Massachusetts in the 1630s. And if you remember, the Puritans founded the colony of Massachusetts Bay in 1630 with John Winthrop as their first governor. In John Winthrop's appearance before the General Court of Massachusetts, excuse me, I'm thinking of the wrong document, the wrong address. What I'm thinking about is John Winthrop's, that's right, John Winthrop's, excuse me, I'm getting a little bit confused here. John Winthrop's address to the General Court, the Massachusetts General Court, in which he defines liberty. And of course, liberty, John Winthrop explains, to many people, if you ask them, would be liberty is the freedom to do whatever you want. In that context, then, individual freedom, if it is the ability or the freedom to do anything we want, then what will we do? John Winthrop makes the point that there are really two kinds of liberty. There's natural liberty and there's civil liberty. Civic liberty. Natural liberty is the right to do whatever you want. And John Winthrop makes the point that that's a kind of liberty that all living creatures have. That's what animals have, is the ability to follow their inclination, to follow their immediate self-interest, whatever it might be. But Winthrop makes the point that that kind of liberty is inconsistent with civilized society, is contradictory to authority. And consequently, that brings up the other definition of liberty that John Winthrop, explains to us, which is the idea of civic liberty. And that, Winthrop explains, is freedom, but it is freedom to do only that which is right, just, and honest. Because that's the only kind of individual liberty that is consistent with civilized society. It's not the right to do whatever you want. It's the right to make legal, legitimate choices within the options that civilized society makes available to us. And Winthrop makes the point that whereas natural liberty is inconsistent and contradictory to authority, civil liberty, the freedom to do that which is right, just, and honest, is not only not inconsistent with authority, it is absolutely dependent upon authority. In other words, the kind of freedoms that living in civilized society makes available to mankind are freedoms that require order, stability, security, predictability, laws that are so generally accepted that citizens will willingly support them because man's common sense tells him that the only way to preserve a civil society is to operate on the assumption that thinking, knowledgeable, intelligent people will do the right thing. But always, this requires in the background government, authority, the power to come down hard on those who violate civil liberty. Because if those who violate civil liberty and replace it with self-interest, if they ever dominate society, then you do not have an organized society at all. You do not have authority, you do not have order, you do not have stability, you do not have predictability, you have no future, you have no safety, you have no security, you have nothing. So consequently, you have no freedom. So what John Winthrop is in essence saying to us is, there's only one kind of freedom that makes any sense. And it is the freedom based on the kinds of legitimate choices or options that society makes available to all of us. And of course, the goal of society would be to make sure that everybody has access to and the opportunity to experience those freedoms, those options, those choices. And based on that, the Massachusetts General Court approves the Body of Liberties, which is not only the first Bill of Rights ever drawn up in the New World by European settlers, but in many ways it's still the best because it's the most complete and the most informative because it is so complete. So again, if one goes into John Winthrop's definition of liberty and recognizes that there are two kinds, one is immediately struck by the fact that for whatever reason, and I think we all agree, and we all know what reasons these are. We'll get to those in a minute. But it seems like society has adopted what Winthrop called natural liberty as the definition of human nature, as the only choice that mankind will make, because that's what is programmed into him. That's his genetic makeup. And of course, in a Western world which has at its basis medieval European Christianity, then religious teaching in Christianity, the fall of Adam and Eve, the stain of original sin, all of that seems to document or reinforce the assumption that man's nature is always evil and that man's choices will always be the ones driven by self-interest, never the ones related to the public interest, to the common interest, to the best interests of other people. So the implication of that assumption is that mankind will only do what he should do if he's forced to. He will never choose to do it because his self-interest will dominate all the time. What we have done here at the Virtual Center in recent weeks is we have gone through looked at the founders. We have looked at some of the writings and letters of the founders. And we have realized and documented the fact that this view of human nature, this negative, I've called it the dark side view of human nature, is not as clear-cut and as absolute as tradition has told us it is. There's all sorts of evidence in the sources, in the documents, that the founders themselves did not buy this absolutely negative, original sin, stained view of human nature that has been attributed to them by pulling out of context isolated phrases like the latent causes of faction are sown into the nature of man, or going to Madison's number 51 and talking about ambition being made to counter ambition, or Madison's statement in that same document that if men were angels, we wouldn't need government at all. And that, in fact, the mere existence of government, Madison says, is probably one of the clearest statements we have about man's nature. If man were angels, we wouldn't need government. Since we do need government, that seems to tell us what man's nature is. And so by taking those isolated phrases out of context, scholars have been able to document and reinforce the very negative view of human nature that has become unquestioned assumption in our society, in our past, in our judicial decisions, in our classrooms, in our textbooks, and in the media. That is the assumption. That is the finding that I believed when I wrote this particular piece that we're talking about in yesterday's Gazette. That's the assumption that I wanted to challenge. I wanted to pull out enough evidence that is contrary to that to make the point that what we believe about human nature is not the product, is not the result of what honest research efforts have told us human nature is. Rather, what we've been taught about human nature is what certain people at certain times, for their own self-interest, have wanted us to believe. Our entire society and the way we operate, the way we treat each other, the way we look at the poor, the way we look at the unemployed, all of these things that are so much a part of our day-to-day lives are driven by this assumption that self-interest is the only thing that man is all about. And the fact that they used the founders to document those assumptions is not the product of honest research. It is rather the product of cherry-picking the past in order to document and reinforce the political agendas of the present. It is unscholarly. It is duplicitous. It is unprofessional. It is no different than the corporations who hired their own scientists and funded them to go into the laboratories and come out with scientific conclusions that challenged legitimate science, hard science. We saw it with Brown and Williamson in the tobacco wars. We saw it with ExxonMobil and other major corporations in the debate over burning of fossil fuels and the damage that it was doing to the environment and to the planet. And I can conclude. I'm making an assumption here. I know. I was shocked by the extent, by the lengths to which these corporations would go in order to defend the way they make a living. And I have to believe that others were equally shocked. I think all of us are aware that people will usually do what benefits them. I mean, that's without question. I think we expect that. We would be disappointed if people didn't do that. People don't choose to go against their own self-interest. But when we saw evidences of the lengths to which these people would go, the lengths to which they would use the absolute obscene amounts of money that were being appropriated for these campaigns to go into our schools, into our classrooms, into the decision-making rooms where our textbooks are edited. And they would clean up the literature. They would take out passages which contradicted this self-interest and insert passages which reinforced their self-interest. In other words, they were loading the deck in what our kids studied. They were basically allowing economic self-interest to drive what people knew and what people believe. And that's the basis on which our traditional view of negative self-interest has been able to thrive for so long. The fact of the matter is, this negative view of human nature, this idea that self-interest and self-interest alone drives human behavior has become and is the sine qua non of free enterprise capitalism. The consumer society, the assumption that if from an economic perspective, all of us are consumers, and our entire free enterprise system is driven by people's need and sense of desire to buy, to consume. All of it is driven by this self-interest dominated idea of human nature. And in the process, the founders, the legitimacy and the honesty of the founders has been, and I'm using this word very appropriately, has been bastardized. It's been compromised. We have not witnessed scholars who have gone into research in order to learn. Instead, what we see are scholars who have looked upon research as an effort to prove, not to discover, not to uncover, not to find, not to learn, but to prove, to strengthen, to indoctrinate. And that's really what it's been about. That's why the generally accepted view or attitude about self-interest is so significant in today's world. What people believe, what our young people believe, what our traditional curriculum developers want our kids to believe, is not driven by what is. It is driven instead, or defined instead, by what we want to find, what we want people to believe, what we want the answers to believe, to be. I would suggest that the importance of this worldview, this particular mindset, it seems to me, is that it helps to explain so many of the issues that confront us in 21st century society today. It explains, it seems to me, many of the problems associated with our education system. It helps us understand why so many organized, powerful interests are opposed to the Common Core standards. And again, I think the Common Core standards, I keep going back to that because they are so prominent in today's political discussion. But it seems to me the reason that they are so significant is because, it seems to me, they hold out the promise that our education system will, by definition, undergo serious, substantive change and emphasis. And there are many powerful interests in society who don't want those interests changed. In effect, they want the same outcomes which have driven our education system in the past to dominate our education system in the future. And I think one of the most revealing aspects about the war over the Common Core standards is that so little of the argument, so little of the discussion focuses on the standards themselves. Rather, it focuses on where the standards came from, who's putting up the money to support them, why the federal government and the Obama administration is so visible in its support of the standards, and on and on and on. So what we are seeing is the attack on the standards is not an attack on the standards. It's an attack on the politics related to the standards. And that, to me, seems to indicate that there must be something about these standards that frighten these people. And I would suggest to you what it is that frightens them. Is the opportunity that the standards provide for young people to go back to the source and really begin to pursue some of the essentials in languages and literature, in mathematics, in science, in STEM subjects, in chemistry, in astronomy, and all the rest of them. It seems to me that the attack on the Common Core standards reveals a level of fear on the part of well-heeled, well-financed interest groups in this country about the changes in the offing should these standards actually happen. So what we see is that in many cases, and West Virginia is right now one of these, is that the standards are being overturned before they're even given the opportunity to work. One of the things we see here in West Virginia is that one of the states adjoining us, which is Kentucky, adopted the standards 3 or 4 years ago. And while the results, student results at the beginning were negative, the fact of the matter is over the last couple of years, the quality of what's happening in Kentucky's schools has so improved, and student performance is so improved on standardized tests, that Kentucky's experience ought to be enough to persuade uncertain legislatures like the West Virginia legislature to give the standards a chance. But instead, the new Republican majority in West Virginia's legislature has received a letter from the President of the Senate and current candidate for governor of the state of West Virginia that effective at the start of the fall legislative session, the very first piece of legislation brought up will be West Virginia's decision to reject the Common Core standards. It seems to me that this is extremely significant. It violates all that we think about when we talk about education and talk about research and talk about new knowledge, the pursuit of new knowledge, the pursuit of understanding. It seems to violate much of what we're about. So, we are pretty much at the end of our first hour together, but what I want to say is that this title that the publishers of the Gazette chose to put on the piece that I wrote, which is the more optimistic and less quoted Federalist view of individuals, is very significant. And I've concluded from that that the publishers believed that that's probably the most substantive thing that the article presents. I can't argue with them. So if I can take this opportunity to wrap this up, and then we'll take our break, and then we can get into something a little bit different. Let me share with you just one or two points within this article which seems to reinforce that view. I think that the editors were right on target in terms of what they did here. One of the paragraphs that I've written in this piece begins with this phrase, "In a side of Madison few of us have ever seen, let alone recommend. We see Madison acknowledge in Federalist number 55, quote, a degree of depravity in mankind, unquote, that warrants attention, but counter it with optimism because it is offset, Madison says, by other qualities in human nature that justify esteem and confidence, unquote. That side of Madison, the side that justifies esteem and confidence in man's nature, in man's ability to govern himself, in the potential for republicanism to work, that side of the equation is a side of Madison that we never get to see. Madison, in number 55, was eager to warn about those people who were determined to persuade us, and this is a quote from Federalist number 55, that there is not sufficient virtue among men for self-government, and that nothing less than the chains of despotism can restrain them from destroying and devouring one another, unquote. Madison is saying those are the people we need to worry about. Those are the people that we need to be careful of. The people that seek to sell us this negative, dark view of human nature in order to justify the fact that these people, because of that nature, are not capable of governing themselves, must be told what to do, must be controlled, must be limited in their options, must be given a form of education which reinforces their evil nature rather than education that questions it. Hamilton says essentially the same thing. And so the way I phrase that is to say that despite persistent denial from those with a political agenda that demands otherwise, most of America's founders endorsed a view of human nature more complex and far less negative than that of the knave most often presented. Thomas Jefferson, and many of you will recall this because we've used it many times, in his letter to Peter Carr in 1787 said, quote, "Man was destined for society. His morality, therefore, was formed to this object. He was endowed with a sense of right and wrong, merely relative to this. This sense is as much a part of his nature as the sense of hearing, seeing, feeling. It is the true foundation of morality." Thomas Jefferson, 1787. We never see that, because that contradicts the view of human nature that those who dominate public opinion in society want us to have. And as we know, David Hume, the source for much of this thinking, said essentially the same thing. So the question is, and my wife made this comment to me when the article was published in the paper yesterday, and she said, "You mention and quote David Hume. Most people don't know who David Hume is." And my answer to her was, no, exactly. The reason people don't know who David Hume is because what David Hume wrote about and what David Hume believed is not consistent with what special interest in the society wanted people to believe. So therefore, David Hume in our education system doesn't even exist. Yet we know that David Hume was a major influence on the founders. We know that. I think that we have touched upon here some really significant political issues that affect all of us. And I think Madison's Federalist number 10, by getting into that kind of detail, makes clear what Madison was really all about. Madison's formula for refining and extending the public views, creating a sense of worldliness and a broader perspective in our political system, in order to refine or to filter out self-interest, so that the innate goodness within people can flourish among our elected representatives. That, to me, is the part of Madison that contradicts those who want to believe that Madison's faction sown into the nature of man is all that there is to Madison. In fact, the reality is that if you buy that view of Madison, that the latent causes of faction are sown in the nature of man, and that man's nature is dominated by self-interest and innately evil, then you are forced to explain Madison's most considerate and virtuous citizens, whose sense of justice and support for liberty and patriotism will enable them to keep the common good constantly in the forefront. If human nature is what our society and special interest in it want us to believe, then the most considerate and virtuous citizens contradict that whole view of human nature. How can that be human nature? And then have people whose love of justice and patriotism are going to cause them not to be governed by self-interest. In other words, human nature either is or it isn't. And so what these people who have traditionally set out to define human nature and blame the founders for that definition have done is leave a major contradiction on the table about Madison. Either Madison was too stupid to see the contradiction in his own thinking, or there's something wrong with that view that people have chosen to attribute to Madison. And I would suggest to you, refining and extending the public views is indeed Madison's answer to those that would accuse him of buying into the dark side of human nature. I really believe that we have touched something here at the Virtual Center, which I think all of us would do well to reflect upon and think about and share. Because the more people who know about it, the better chance we have to witness serious change in our own lifetimes. We've reached 10 minutes after the hour. We're into our second hour, but I do want to pause for a 4 or 5 minute break, and then we'll come right back and we'll pursue the rest of our second hour together here at the Virtual Center. I want to get back to Madison a little bit in the balance of our program today, because I think Madison is probably the best source we've got for a lot of this. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. This is Bill O'Brien. We're going to pause for a short break. We'll be right back. Please.
We now return to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Here's Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Bob Kincaid, and welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center. It will obviously be an abbreviated hour because we've already eaten up 15 minutes of it. It is 14 minutes after the hour, so we have about 44 minutes left in our second hour here on this Monday at the Virtual Center. Let me again remind you that we will not be doing a program this Wednesday, nor will we be doing programs next week. I'll be out of town next week for the bulk of the week. I'll be returning late, and actually many of the things that we have to do on Wednesday are things that I need to take care of before I leave town. So I want to alert you to that. So tomorrow's program, which begins 1/2 hour later than we began today, it will begin at 1:30 Eastern Time tomorrow and run to our regular 3 o'clock conclusion. It will be the final live broadcast here at the Virtual Center, not only for this week, but for next week as well. I want to share with you our phone number and along with my email address and encourage you to take advantage of these opportunities to be heard. Because very honestly, many of the ideas that I'm expressing here are just that. They are ideas. They are my efforts to try to explain sources. And not only, hopefully, do they help to inform your understanding of some of these issues, but your reaction to them and your input and insight into them helps me clarify and reinforce these ideas even more. Again, my goal is to not promote or sell these ideas. My goal is to understand. And if your criticism would literally shake the foundation of some of the things that I've been saying over the last couple of weeks about Madison and about Federalist Number 10, then not only will I not welcome your comments, I will cherish your comments. Because if I'm wrong, I want to know it. I don't have that much time in my life to fool around with ideas that I know to be untrue, but that are politically popular. I want to try to understand. And part of the reason is because I so cherish our time together here at the Virtual Center, because I have been blessed with the opportunity to share ideas and thinking on these subjects with you, the Head On Radio Network listening audience, and those who have become supporters of the Virtual Center. This is an opportunity that I do not take lightly, that I cherished. And I want to know that I'm doing the best job in terms of carrying out this opportunity, fulfilling this opportunity that I can. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. waobrien, OBRIEN, 906@gmail.com. And again, I call your attention to our Facebook page. Just go to Facebook on your browser and type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will gain access to our Facebook page. And the latest entry posting on it is the particular article that we kind of based our first hour around today. I want to begin the second hour by just sharing with you concluding comments, concluding a few lines on the particular article in question in order to bring much of what we did during our first hour to a logical and just conclusion. What I have basically said in conclusion to all of this is, quote, a like mindset about man's nature has become maxim in today's economic world to drive contemporary capitalism and the consumer mentality that sustains it. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes warned us more than a century ago in his Lochner versus New York dissent that, quote, a constitution is not intended to promote a particular economic theory, unquote. In fact, that is exactly what we have allowed to happen. It's hard to deny the validity of the Pope's concern in Laudato Si, the recent encyclical, that man's total fixation on economic development and the self-interested values that drive it as unquestioned confirmation of man's nature, bereft of any moral dimension whatsoever, does indeed threaten the planet. It's even more difficult to not question the degree to which scholar enablers, in pursuit of corporate patrons and grants, demean their professional integrity in their sweep through America's past for evidence to sustain what they are paid to find. Not only have we taken the founders' words out of context to promote a narrow, self-serving economic agenda, we have consciously suppressed evidence from these same sources that would refute it. Publius, the voice of Madison, Hamilton, and John Jay in The Federalist, has been cherry-picked and compromised in order to promote a particular view of human nature. The sources cited above that suggest something quite different, rarely make it into our textbooks, classrooms, or media. Is the conservative uprising against the Common Core educational standards merely the latest example of an ideological determination to keep America's young on track for entry into an illusory sheltered world we continue to insist that they embrace? Or worse, is it unwittingly to deny them skills they'll need for success in the real world that awaits them? And what of the Donald Trump phenomenon? What particular chords in the American electorate is he touching? Might the Donald really not be a phenomenon at all, but simply a glib demagogue, able to tap into the unrealistic dream of American exceptionalism that many believe was stolen from us? Might the perspectives presented here be, in Madison's words, the power that change, the power which knowledge gives? Let's hope so. Those last three words, let's hope so. What I'm basically expressing there is my hope that once we see through the facade of what's been and continues to be presented to us, it will be the beginning of action, that it will produce what Madison called the power which knowledge gives. Hopefully, with this particular piece, we have the knowledge. The next step is to go after the power that goes with it. That's really the piece. I'm very, 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 very confident that this is an important piece, and I want to thank and express my appreciation to the Gazette for publishing it. And I want to express my thanks to you for putting up with yet another program, a huge portion of which is devoted to it. I think it's that important. I hope you agree. I mentioned before our break a few moments ago that I wanted to return to Madison in the time that is left. We spent so much time on Federalist number 10. And again, I think what makes Federalist number 10 significant is the way that it's written. It's not the only reason that it's significant. I think what it says is significant, obviously. But I think the way it is written is significant as well. And the reason for that is that Federalist number 10 was written for and published in the newspaper. By definition, it was there for all who could read it to read. The issue, of course, is to distinguish between those who could read it and those who would read it. I think when we consider that fact, we can begin to understand the way that Federalist Number 10 is written. Much of what we've done with Federalist Number 10 is in the context of interpretation. Madison doesn't say clearly, right out, what he believes here. But he's saying enough that's close to it in a way which makes it difficult for all but the right people to understand it. And again, when I say the right people, I think we have to put that psychologically in quotes. Because by the right people, I'm talking about the people that Madison believes whose support will be necessary to get the Constitution ratified. It's very obviously that the masses of people, if they really understood some of the things that we've pulled out of Federalist Number 10, if the masses had seen this kind of meaning in Federalist Number 10, then Madison's document would not have promoted the ratification of the Constitution. It would have sabotaged it. It would have submarined it once and for all. So I think we need to be aware of the different levels on which different people would read that document. Those who read superficially on an elementary level are going to focus on the choice of words. They're going to focus on violence and hostility and injustice and confusion and all of these other things in order to see negatives in government which the Constitution theoretically will fix. But those who read at a much deeper level are going to see the kind of meaning that we've tried to bring out of the document over the last couple of weeks. My point here is I say this as introduction to a return to a document that we looked at some time ago here. And this is Madison's document written just prior to the convening of the Constitutional Convention. Madison's document entitled Vices of the Political System of the United States. This was a document, a letter, that Madison put together in April of 1787, a month before the convention was scheduled to convene. He sent this document to his closest friends and allies. In this document, since it was not written for mass publication in the newspapers, Madison is a lot more direct, is a lot clearer on what he means than he is in Federalist Number 10. My point is, if you read what Madison says in his Vices document, and then lay it side by side with the way he says the same thing in Federalist Number 10, you will begin to see what Madison has been very successful in doing with the way he wrote Number 10. I'm not going to go through the vices. I will tell you that, we went through them one time here on the Virtual Center some months ago. There are 12 particular issues that Madison raises in this document. In fact, they are numbered 1 through 12 in the original. And after each item, after each numbered item, Madison includes a paragraph or 2 or 3, depending on the issue, elaborating on how he sees that particular issue and what he hopes, or how he hopes the constitutional change that he has in mind will address it. I'm not going to go through all of these, not only because we don't have time, but also because a lot of it is not directly pertinent to the themes that we've been developing here. But let me kind of reacquaint you with the titles of the 12 items, just so you can get an idea. Then we'll go back and we'll spend the bulk of our time in this hour on the 2 or 3 items which seemingly do pertain to what we've looked at in Federalist number 10. First, the list of 12. Among the vices that Madison identifies are the following. Number 1, failure of the states to comply with constitutional requisitions, requests for money from the states. Number 2, encroachment by states on the federal authority. Number 3, violations of the laws of nations and treaties. The fact that under the Articles of Confederation, states continue to not abide by treaties that the Congress of the United States has obligated the United States to abide by, like the Treaty of Peace with Great Britain ending the Revolutionary War. Number 4, trespasses of the states on the rights of each other. Excuse me. Number 4, trespasses of the states on the rights of each other. States are not cooperating with each other. They're working at cross purposes with each other. Number 5, want of concert in matters where common interest requires it. Not only are the states competing with each other, but they're not cooperating when they should. Number 6, want of guarantee to the states of their constitutions and laws against internal violence. A stronger central government will create the power of coercion necessary in government in order to stifle internal violence. Number 7, want of sanction to the laws and of coercion in the government of the Confederacy. He points out that a lack of the power to coerce, an inability to enforce the laws, is one of the weaknesses of the Articles government. Number 8, want of ratification by the people of the Articles of Confederation. Madison believes that the legitimacy of a constitution as fundamental law demands that the document be ratified by the people, the consent of the governed. The Articles of Confederation never was ratified that way. It was approved by the state governments, never by the people. Of course, the ratification of the Constitution would fix that. Number 10, mutability of the laws of the states. In other words, the fact that there's so much difference between the laws of the different states. The next one, multiplicity of the laws of the several states. There are so many laws in the different states that it's impossible for citizens to know what the law is at any particular time and place. That's number 9. Number 10, the mutability of the laws, the extent to which these laws continually change all the time. Number 11, the injustice of the laws of the states. The fact that many of the laws passed are unjust to certain people. And of course, the people that we're going to be concerned, that Madison's going to be concerned about, is the minority faction, the few, the propertied. That's number 11. Number 12, a still more fatal, if not more frequent cause lies among the people. That's an elaboration of the last one. The number 12 is the impotence of laws of the states. In other words, many of the state governments are unable, do not have the wherewithal to enforce their own laws, especially when they're confronted by a majority of the people that doesn't want them to do that. So those are the 12. I want to return to the last couple. More specifically to 11. 10 and 11. The mutability of the laws, number 10, and injustice of the laws, number 11. Let me share with you what Madison says about mutability because it relates directly to some of the things we touched upon in our first hour. Madison says, in terms of mutability of the laws of the states, quote, this evil is intimately connected with the former, which is there are so many laws, yet deserves a distinct notice as it emphatically denotes a vicious legislation. We daily see laws repealed or superseded before any trial can have been made of their merits, and even before a knowledge of them can have reached the remoter districts within which they were to operate. In the regulations of trade, this instability becomes a snare not only to our citizens, but to foreigners also. When Madison talks about the mutability of the laws, he's talking about the fact that in the states, many laws which are passed end up being changed before they even get a chance to work, or before citizens even have a chance to know that that particular law exists. It's gone. This is what we talked about with the Common Core in our first hour. The Common Core has not yet had a chance to work in most states. But already those with a political agenda are out to end it, to sabotage it, to reject it, even though states initially approved them. Madison is saying here in his letter, his Vices of the System, that the same kind of thing happened in the Confederation period. That powerful interests who didn't like a particular law on the books, whether it even had a chance to work yet, would change it. And therefore, people were being denied the opportunity to see whether, in fact, the law was a good one or not. If we are to learn by experience, then you need to give some of these a chance to work in order to see whether, in fact, they are good or bad pieces of legislation. Madison points out that too often they change before that experience is even available, because organized groups, factions, have a self-interest against that particular law. They don't want it to work for fear that it might. I think we're facing the same thing with the Common Core. And that's why I wanted to share with you what Madison says in point number 10 of his Vices of the Political System of the United States. Madison is pointing out that the same kind of thing existed in America in the 1780s. He's talking about organized interest groups that are imposing their self-interested agenda on the majority before the majority even had a chance to know what didn't have an opportunity to work, didn't even have a trial run. That's indeed what we're facing today. And then the next one, and this is the one I want to focus on because this is the one that mirrors Federalist number 10. Again, the difference between this document and Federalist number 10 is that Federalist number 10 was printed for the newspapers. It was for public consumption. This document was a private document in which Madison was sharing his thinking with friends that he trusted. He's much more open here. He can say what he believes here more than he can say that in Federalist number 10. Let's look at number 11, which Madison calls injustice of the laws of the states. Now he's going to explain what he means. If the multiplicity and mutability of laws prove a want of wisdom, those are the last 2 points, the multiplicity, the many different laws that exist in the states, and the mutability, the extent to which they keep changing all the time. If those prove a want of wisdom, Madison says, their injustice betrays a defect still more alarming. More alarming not merely because it's a greater evil in itself, but because it brings more into question the fundamental principle of Republican government, that the majority who rule in such governments are the safest guardians both of public good and of private rights. To what causes is this evil to be ascribed? Again, let me share that particular phrase with you. The reason, Madison says, that this particular issue of injustice is even more alarming, potentially a greater evil, is because it raises the fundamental question as to whether Republican government can even work or not. So this one is one we need to look at, because the reality is that in Republican governments, majorities rule. The majority who rule in such governments, Madison says, are the safest guardians both of public good and of private rights. If we believe that, Madison is saying, if we believe that Republican governments, the people themselves, are the best guarantors, the best protectors of the common good and of private rights, then we got a problem. Because our current governments, our current political setup under the Articles makes it too easy to keep changing laws before they have a chance to work. In republicanism, the majority will govern. What Madison is saying here, although he doesn't say it in these words, is that if republicanism is to be given a chance, if we are going to allow republicanism to work, if we are going to continue to believe that it can work, then if majorities are going to dictate to government, then we need to have the opportunity to educate the majority on what the right decision is. And of course, as we know, in Federalist number 10, that education process is the refinement and the extending of the public views. That takes time. We've got to have time to educate the majority, because the majority in a republic dictates what government does. So then Madison gets into what's the problem here? What are the causes in this evil? What causes this evil? He says these causes lie, one, in the representatives' bodies, the elected governments, two, in the people themselves. The first one which is the representative bodies, the elected representatives, the legislatures. In the case under the Constitution, the Congress. Representative appointments are sought from three motives. The reason, Madison said, the reason that men run to be elected representative are for three reasons. One, ambition. Two, personal interest. Three, public good. Madison said there are three motives that cause people to stand for election as a representative. Then he goes on and addresses each of these. Unhappily, he said, the first two, ambition and personal interest, are proved by experience to be most prevalent. Hence, the candidates who feel them, particularly the second, personal interest, are most industrious and most successful in pursuing their object. Most of the people who run for office do so for their own self-interest. They've got something they want to gain. Madison said we got to get that out of the process if republicanism is going to work. So these people, the ambitious, the those with personal interest, are most successful, are the most industrious and most successful in pursuing their object, and forming often a majority in the legislative councils, with interested views contrary to the interest and views of their constituents, join in a perfidious sacrifice of the latter to the former. Self-interest drives representatives to stand for office in the first place. They work the hardest because their self-interest is so strong. They get elected. Then they get into the elected legislature with other representatives who were driven by self-interest to be there as well. And when they get together and form a majority, they sacrifice the public interest to their own private interests. It stands to reason. They ran for self-interest. They find that they are elected and serving with a bunch of people who also ran for self-interest. Once they get together, they form the majority in the legislature, and they fulfill their self-interested agenda at the expense of the public interest. But how easily are based and selfish motives, he says, masked by pretext of public good and apparent expediency. These people are professional experts in arguing that their self-interest is really the public interest, that in pursuing their own self-interest, they are really doing what's best for the public. They aren't responding to the common interest or to the public interest. They are defining it. They are defining it in terms of their own self-interest. How frequently, Madison says, will a repetition of the same arts and industry which succeeded in the first entrance again prevail on the unwary to misplace their confidence? How frequently, too, will the honest but unenlightened representative be the dupe of a favorite leader with the glowing colors of popular eloquence? Excuse me, I skipped the line. How frequently, too, will the honest but unenlightened representative be the dupe of a favorite leader, veiling his selfish views under the professions of public good, and varnishing his sophisticated arguments with the glowing colors of popular eloquence? We are dealing here with a real problem in our elected legislatures, because we know that self-interest more than anything else causes people to run for elected office. When they get in there, they rub shoulders with other people who have been brought there by their self-interest, and they form the majority. And by definition, as a majority, their self-interest is going to carry the day. They're the ones that are going to pass the laws. But they are experts in selling the public on the idea that this is not their self-interest that's happening, it's the public interest. This is what you need. This is best for you. They become salesmen. They become duplicitous, dishonest salesmen who are selling their own self-interest under the guise of the public interest. And even the ones who are there to do the public good, who are there for the right reasons, often find themselves falling under the influence of a very persuasive, eloquent leader. I'm thinking of somebody like Ted Cruz here, who's a brilliant debater, studied debate at Harvard. These people are experts at veiling their selfish views under the profession of the common good and varnishing their sophisticated arguments with the glowing colors of popular eloquence. These are professional bullshitters. And good people tend to fall under their influence. The sum total is that in our legislative chambers, the public interest, the common good, doesn't stand a chance. There's no way that Madison could say this in the newspapers in Federalist number 10. But he can say it to the people that he's sending this particular document to, because they know darn well that what he's saying is right on. So that's the representative body's part in causing the problem of unjust laws in the state. But a still more fatal problem, Madison says, is the people themselves. He said, quote, a still more fatal, if not more frequent cause, lies among the people themselves. Now, this is going to be familiar because this is Federalist number 10, but it's written in a little bit more straightforward language than Federalist number 10 is. All civilized societies, Madison says, are divided into different interests and factions, as they happen to be creditors or debtors, rich or poor, husbandmen, merchants, or manufacturers, members of different religious sects, followers of different political leaders, inhabitants of different districts, owners of different kinds of property, etc., etc., etc. In Republican government, the majority, however composed, ultimately give the law. Whenever, therefore, an apparent interest or common passion unites a majority, what is to restrain them from unjust violations of the rights and interests of the minority or of individuals? Three motives only. If a common motive does in fact take hold of the people, what is there to restrain them? Madison says there are only three things that can restrain self-interest under this kind of situation. One, a prudent regard to their own good as involved in the general and permanent good of the community. The first check on their willingness to go along with the majority and pursue their self-interest, the first check is seeing how their own good is linked directly to the permanent good of the whole community. This consideration, Madison says, although of decisive weight in itself, is found by experience to be too often unheeded. This one doesn't work. This is no check at all. Secondly, respect for character. However strong this motive may be in individuals, it is considered as very insufficient to restrain them from injustice. In a multitude, its efficacy is diminished in proportion to the number which is to share the praise or the blame. Even if people have respectable character, even if they are of good character, there's not enough to allow that good character to dictate their behavior when they find themselves part of a majority that is driven by self-interest. So the larger the multitude, Madison says, the stronger the self-interest and the more likely it is to prevail. Besides, he says, as it has reference to public opinion, which within a particular society is the opinion of the majority, the standard is fixed by those whose conduct is to be measured by it. The public opinion without the society will be little respected by the people at large of any country. Individuals of extended views and of national pride may bring the public proceedings to this standard, but the example will never be followed by the multitude. If we expect character to control people's desire to pursue their own self-interest by going along with the majority, we are dreaming, Madison says. It can't happen. even when there are individuals of extended views and national pride. They may bring it up, but it never has a chance of being approved by the multitude. Is it to be imagined that an ordinary citizen or even an assemblyman of Rhode Island, for example, in estimating the policy of paper money, ever considered or cared in what light the measure would be viewed in France or Holland, or even in Massachusetts or Connecticut? Once people realize that paper money is going to play into their own self-interest, then they don't give a hell what people overseas or what people in other states believe. They're going to do what's best for them. It was a sufficient temptation to both that it was for their interest. It was a sufficient sanction to the latter that it was popular in the state. To the former, it was so in the neighborhood. So character, one's reputable character, may be a factor in the discussions, but it never is enough to persuade the majority in a Republican representative government. Third comes religion. Will religion, the only remaining motive, be a sufficient restraint? It is not pretended to be such on men individually considered. Will its effect be greater on them considered as an aggregate view? Quite the reverse. In other words, if religion isn't enough to control the individual and his behavior, no way in the world is religion going to control the behavior of a group. The conduct of every popular assembly acting on oath, the strongest of religious ties, proves that individuals join without remorse in acts against which their consciences would revolt if proposed to them under the like sanction separately in their closets. In other words, even if people's conscience wouldn't let them do something when they are acting alone, when they are members of a group, they tend to do things that they would never even consider doing if they were acting alone. When indeed religion is kindled into enthusiasm, Madison says, its force, like that of other passions, is increased. We'll continue this tomorrow, this particular paragraph, because I think it's very, very significant. It goes an awful lot to explain Federalist number 10. The value of the Vices document is that it's private. And Madison is laying out the explanations here in more clarity than he does in Federalist number 10. You almost have to draw it out from between the lines in Federalist number 10. Here, he says it straight up. Why am I doing this? Because I believe that this particular document, Madison's Vices of the Political System of the United States, documents the validity of the interpretations we drew in Federalist number 10. In other words, when we read the document, we were speculating. When we throw the evidence from this document against that one, it becomes evidence. I think that's the difference. It is 2 minutes before the top of the hour. It is 2:58 in the East. So with that, I want to bring today's program to a close. I want to thank you very, very much for your willingness to support the Virtual Center. Tomorrow, I remind you that we will begin 1/2 hour later than we did today. I remind you also that tomorrow's program will be our final live program, not only for this week, but for next week as well. So tomorrow's program almost becomes a have to, if that makes sense. We'll finish this Vices document with Madison, then we'll begin to look at what's happening in Washington. We'll go down, look at the agenda of presidential candidates, and try to reach some sort of a conclusion as to whether, in fact, Madison's formula for the success of Republican government is even operative in today's political world. Thank you so very much for your continued support of the Virtual Center and for your continued support of the Head On Radio Network. We appreciate it so very, very much. I hope that what we are doing justifies your continued support. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Be safe. We'll get back together again tomorrow. This is Ryan for the Virtual Center. Thank you. Good day.